Hey guys, this video is going to go over the basics when it comes to quotes and citations. This information comes from the handout you should have received in class. If you haven't received it, or if you don't have it with you, there's a link to the form in the description of this video, so feel free to check that out. Okay, so let's get started. First, we're going to talk about some basic definitions. What do I mean when I say quotes and citations? You're probably familiar with the term quote being used to describe something that someone said. Well, for our purposes, a quote is a sentence or phrase from a book, speech, etc., which is repeated in another piece of writing to offer support, explanation, or additional information. Basically, that means any text you take from one piece of writing and use in your own writing is a quote. Keep in mind, though, a quote doesn't have to be something someone says in the original text, so you don't have to use only dialogue. Anything you copy from one text to use in your own writing is considered a quote. And, as you hopefully know, when you use a quote from someone else's work, you have to give that person credit. That's where a citation comes in. A citation is a reference crediting an original work or the work's author when using a quote or paraphrasing. So basically, a citation tells the reader where you got your information. Citations come after the quote, and you always have to have one when you're using someone else's work, period. Let's take a look at some examples so you can see what I'm talking about. This first example is from Stargirl, which, as you hopefully know, is written by Jerry Spinelli. It says, she was elusive, she was today, she was tomorrow. Spinelli 15. I want you to take note of a couple of things. First of all, this section here at the end is the citation. Spinelli is the author's name. 15 says that it's coming from page 15. Obviously, you know that it's Stargirl, but as you can see, we don't have the title in the citation. Something else I'd like you to notice is that there are quotes at the beginning and at the end of the sentence, but notice that there is no ending punctuation after tomorrow. The period at the end of the sentence comes after the citation because that's considered part of the sentence. Let's take a look at another example. This next example is by Sherman Alexie, who wrote The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, which you'll read at the high school next year. The quote says, "The world, even the smallest parts of it, is filled with things you don't know," which I think is kind of an exciting statement about how much there is to learn. But looking at the quote, you can obviously see that here at the end we have the citation again. It gives us our author's name and tells us that we've gotten this from page 97. Something else to notice about this one is that this set of quotes here at the beginning and at the end has one regular quotation mark followed by a single apostrophe or a single quote. The same thing is true at the end. There's a single quote and then a double quotation mark. This is because the person in the book is speaking at this point, and so we have to show that that's actually dialogue in addition to being a quote from another book. We'll talk about this at another point and go into more detail with this, but it's just something to notice right now. Notice again that the period at the end of the sentence comes after the citation, and that's because the citation is considered part of the sentence. Let's take a look at one last example. This one says, Shay's long-range hoverboard was thicker and glimmered with the facets of solar cells. Westerfeld 90. Obviously, this one is like the first one. We have single quotes at the beginning and at the end. We have our citation here, which says that this is from something by Westerfeld, in this case, Uglies by Scott Westerfeld, and it's from page 90. We also have our period at the end of the sentence because, again, the citation is considered part of the sentence, and so our ending punctuation happens at the end of the sentence. Alright, next let's take a look at some key points about quotes and citations. Generally, a quote must appear exactly as it does in the original document, so it should be an exact copy. Some omissions may be allowed by using an ellipsis, or the 3 dots here. But using an ellipsis and taking out part of a quote cannot change the meaning of the quote. For example, if you had this quote, "I would never lie to you," you couldn't change the meaning by eliminating the word never, replacing it with "I would ... lie to you," because that obviously changes the meaning of the sentence. Something else to keep in mind when you're using quotes is that they should never stand alone, so they should be within a sentence you've written. They should also never begin or end a paragraph. Sometimes it's okay to start your paper with a quote as an attention getter, but generally speaking, your first sentence is going to be your topic sentence, and your last sentence is going to recap that, so you probably want to avoid quotes in those situations. Finally, keep in mind that quotes should always relate to the topic of the paragraph they're within. Quotes are used to support your arguments and your statements. They should be selected carefully. Don't just throw in something random. Next, let's take a look at block quotes. A block quote is a passage, longer than 4 lines, from a book, speech, etc., which is repeated in another piece of writing to offer support, explanation, or additional information. So basically, block quotes are just extra long quotes. They're basically the same as regular quotes, but they're just substantially larger, 4 lines or more from your original work. Keep in mind that when you're using a block quote, formatting is different for using regular quotes and for block quotes. We'll take a look at an example on the next slide. In this example, I've used a block quote from a memoir by Nancy Stefan. Everything you see on this slide is part of one paragraph, including the block quote. So although it's separated into what looks like 3 sections, it's all a part of a single paragraph. As with all paragraphs, we begin by indenting our first line. In this passage, Nancy Stefan describes her first experience with death. She begins the memoir by recounting the death of her mother, which occurred when Nancy was very young. These sentences at the beginning tell the reader what the paragraph will be about and provide an introduction to the quote. The sentence right before the quote basically previews the quote. Notice that this sentence ends with a colon here at the end. You can think of the colon as like an equals sign, so whatever happens before the colon should equal whatever happens after. That's why we preview the quote, then use a colon, and then have our block quote here. As you can see with the block quote, it's indented by 1 inch. All block quotes are indented in this way. There are no quotation marks surrounding the quote. You can tell it's a block quote simply because it's indented by 1 inch. The only time you would use quotation marks in a block quote is if you were quoting dialogue. At the end of the quote, we have our citation here, but notice that the period is before the citation, unlike in the other quotes. Finally, at the end of the paragraph, we have a summary that kind of ties things together and recaps the quote. Here it says, obviously, Stefan begins her memoir with a fairly shocking story. Although her mother's death is not the central event in the memoir, this initial story sets the tone for the reader and brings death into the picture right away. As Stefan's story continues, it becomes clear that another, more recent death has inspired her to write about her experiences. As you can see here in the paragraph, this last section is not indented and returns to the margin because this is just the end of our paragraph. This is the format you'll use when we're working with block quotes, which is something we'll practice together before you'll be doing it on your own. And that's it. There's more information available on your Quotes and Citations handout, but this covers the basics and should help you feel a little more comfortable with quotes as we begin to use them in our writing. Feel free to rewind the video, pause, take notes, or, as always, shoot me a text, email, or phone call if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.